Zama's busy schedule at the university left little time for anything else. Between classes, assignments, and part-time work at the campus library, her days were packed. She thrived in her studies, earning praise from her professors and finding joy in the learning process. Yet, her success came with a cost. The distance between her and Sabelo grew, their once frequent calls becoming less frequent as their lives took different directions. When they did speak, the conversations felt strained. "You sound tired," Sabelo said during one of their calls. "Are you okay?" Zama hesitated before answering. "I'm fine," she said, though the weight of her responsibilities was beginning to take a toll. Sabelo, meanwhile, struggled with his own frustrations. He admired Zama's determination but couldn't shake the feeling that he was being left behind. "You're doing amazing things, Zama," he said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. "I just hope you don't forget where you came from." Zama heard the unspoken pain in his words and felt a pang of guilt. "I could never forget," she said softly. But as the call ended, she couldn't help but wonder if their bond would survive the changes in their lives. The growing rift between them was undeniable, and Zama didn't know how to bridge it without sacrificing her dreams. The start of the academic semester brought a fresh wave of excitement and nerves. Zama's first lecture was in a large, packed hall, and she felt both awed and intimidated by the sheer number of students. The professor, a stern but engaging woman named Dr. Patel, began the session by diving straight into the material. Zama quickly realized she was one of the few students taking notes by hand, her lack of access to a laptop making her feel self-conscious. Yet, she focused intently, determined to absorb every word. By the end of the lecture, her notebook was filled with detailed notes, and she felt a sense of accomplishment. As the weeks went on, Zama began to adjust to the rhythm of university life. She spent long hours in the library, poring over textbooks and completing assignments. But the challenges were constant. Her classmates often discussed concepts she didn't fully understand, and her struggles with English sometimes made it difficult to follow complex lectures. One afternoon, a kind classmate named Thandi offered to help. "You're smart, Zama," she said. "You just need a little guidance." Thandi's encouragement gave Zama the confidence to keep pushing forward. Slowly but surely, she began to find her footing, proving to herself that she was capable of succeeding in this new and unfamiliar world. As Zama settled deeper into her studies, the financial strain of city life began to take its toll. Although her scholarship covered tuition and housing, there were countless other expenses, books, transport, food, that required careful budgeting. One afternoon, as she pored over a list of required textbooks in the library, she realized she didn't have enough money to buy them all. Frustration and worry bubbled to the surface, and she buried her face in her hands. "Are you okay?" a voice asked. Zama looked up to see Thandi, the classmate who had offered to help her before. "I'm fine," Zama replied, forcing a smile. But Thandi wasn't convinced. After some coaxing, Zama admitted her struggle. Thandi thought for a moment before smiling. "I've got some of these books at home from last year," she said. "You can borrow them if you want." Zama's relief was immediate. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice filled with gratitude. Thandi nodded. "Of course. We've all been there." That evening, Thandi brought Zama a stack of textbooks, and the two spent hours chatting about their shared experiences. Zama learned that Thandi, too, came from a modest background and had faced many of the same challenges. Their budding friendship became a source of comfort for Zama, reminding her that she didn't have to navigate this journey alone. Weeks passed, and Zama's focus on her studies left little time for anything else. But one afternoon, she received a letter from home. The sight of her younger sister Lindio's handwriting filled her with a mix of excitement and dread. As she read the letter, her emotions swirled. Lindio wrote about the family, describing how their mother often looked sad and how their father barely spoke about Zama anymore. "Mama misses you," the letter said. "She talks about you every night when she thinks no one is listening. I miss you too. Please write back." Zama's heart ached as she folded the letter and placed it on her desk. She wanted to reach out, to tell her family that she still loved them and that her decision to leave wasn't a rejection of them but a choice for herself. That evening, she sat down to write a reply. She described her life in the city, the challenges she faced, and the friends she had made. She also reassured Lindio that she thought of her family every day. When she finished, she felt a small sense of relief. Although she couldn't bridge the gap between her and her father just yet, she hoped her words would bring some comfort to her mother and sister. Despite her efforts to save, Zama's financial struggles only deepened. She took on a part-time job cleaning classrooms at the university after hours, using the money to cover food and other essentials. The work was exhausting, leaving her little time to rest or study, but she had no other choice. One evening, as she scrubbed the floors of an empty lecture hall, she thought about her father's words. A woman's place is with her family. For a moment, she wondered if he had been right. Life in the city was harder than she had imagined, and there were nights when she longed for the simplicity of home. But then she thought of Sabelo's encouragement, Thandi's kindness, and the opportunities her education would bring. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was paving the way for others like her. The thought reignited her determination. The next day, she approached Dr. Molify after class and told him about her struggles. "You're not alone, Zama," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "Many students face these challenges. Let me see if there's any additional support the university can offer." His words gave Zama hope. She realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a step toward finding solutions. Back in the village, Sabelo's life continued to revolve around the fields and his family's expectations. But his thoughts were never far from Zama. He followed her updates closely, cherishing every letter and phone call. Yet, as he worked the land day after day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being left behind. Zama was thriving in the city, while he remained tethered to the same routines and responsibilities. One evening, as he sat under the Mariela tree, he reflected on his own dreams. He had always wanted more than what the village offered, but he had never dared to pursue it. The next time he spoke to Zama, he brought up his feelings. "I'm proud of you," he said, "but sometimes I wonder if there's a place for me in your new life." Zama's heart sank at his words. "You'll always have a place, Sabelo," she said softly. "You've been my anchor through everything." But Sabelo shook his head, even though she couldn't see him. "You're soaring, Zama. I'm still stuck on the ground." The conversation left both of them feeling unsettled. Zama knew she owed much of her strength to Sabelo's support, but she also realized that he needed to find his own path. For the first time, their bond felt fragile, and Zama feared what the future might hold for them. As Zama adjusted to university life, she often found herself grappling with questions of identity. The fast-paced, cosmopolitan culture of Johannesburg was exciting but alien to her. Students dressed in sleek, modern clothes, discussed international news, and moved with an air of confidence that Zama couldn't quite emulate. She tried her best to blend in, but there were moments when she felt out of place. One afternoon, during a campus event, she overheard a group of students mocking the traditions of rural communities. "Why do people still cling to those outdated ways?" one of them said, laughing. The comment stung, and Zama quickly walked away, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. Later that evening, she confided in Thandi, who listened with a thoughtful expression. "You don't have to choose one or the other, Zama," Thandi said. "You can embrace your heritage and still thrive here. That's what makes you unique." Zama thought about Thandi's words as she stared out of her dormitory window, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. She realized that her identity wasn't something to be hidden or apologized for. It was a source of strength. From that day on, Zama began to carry herself differently. She wore her beaded bracelet proudly and spoke of her village with pride when asked. Slowly but surely, she began to bridge the gap between her past and her present, finding a sense of balance that felt authentic and empowering. Months passed before Zama gathered the courage to visit her village. The scholarship program included a mid-year break, and Zama decided it was time to see her family, despite her father's silence. The bus ride home was long and filled with mixed emotions. When she finally stepped off the bus and saw the familiar landscape of her village, her heart swelled with nostalgia. But as she walked through the dusty streets, she noticed the curious, judgmental stares of the villagers. Some whispered as she passed, while others avoided her gaze altogether. Zama's stomach churned with unease. When she arrived at her family's hut, her mother greeted her with open arms, tears streaming down her face. "My child, you're home," Nomusa said, pulling Zama into a tight embrace. Her siblings crowded around her, their excitement infectious. But her father remained in the background, his expression unreadable. That evening, as the family sat around the fire, Zama tried to engage her father in conversation. "Baba, I've missed you," she said softly. He glanced at her but said nothing, his silence heavier than words. Despite the warmth of her mother and siblings, Zama felt the weight of her father's disappointment. Her visit, while bittersweet, reminded her of how far she had come, and how much further she still had to go to mend the fractures in her family. After returning to Johannesburg, Zama couldn't stop thinking about her visit home. The joy of seeing her mother and siblings had been overshadowed by her father's coldness. She called Sabelo to share her thoughts, and their conversation turned to the growing distance between them. "You're the only one who understands what it's like," Zama said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Sometimes I feel like I've lost a part of myself by leaving." Sabelo was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You haven't lost anything, Zama. You've just found more of yourself. But maybe you've also left something behind." Zama felt the weight of his words, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. "Sabelo," she began hesitantly, "do you ever regret supporting me? Do you wish I had stayed?" His answer came without hesitation. "Never. I could never regret helping you chase your dreams. But sometimes, I wish I'd been brave enough to chase mine." The admission hit Zama like a punch to the chest. She realized how much Sabelo had sacrificed for her, and a part of her wondered if she had taken his support for granted. Their conversation ended on a tender but unresolved note, both of them grappling with feelings they couldn't fully articulate. For Zama, the love she felt for Sabelo was undeniable, but it remained unspoken, tangled in the complexities of their evolving lives. The final weeks of the semester brought new challenges. Zama threw herself into her studies, determined to excel, but the emotional strain of balancing her academic life and her family's expectations weighed heavily on her. Then, one evening, she received a call from her mother. "Your father is ill," Nomusa said, her voice thick with worry. "He's been refusing to see a doctor. He says he doesn't want to burden the family." Zama's heart sank. Despite their differences, she couldn't bear the thought of her father's suffering. She promised her mother she would come home during the next break. When Zama arrived at the village a week later, the atmosphere in her home was somber. Her father lay on a mat, his face pale and his body frail. For the first time in her life, Zama saw him as vulnerable. Sitting beside him, she reached for his hand. "Baba," she said softly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm here." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and sorrow. "You've grown strong, my daughter," he said, his voice weak. "I was wrong to try to hold you back. You have your mother's spirit, always moving forward, no matter the cost." His words were a turning point for Zama. Though their relationship was far from healed, it was the first step toward reconciliation. As she sat by his side, she realized that forgiveness and understanding would be key to bridging the divide between her dreams and her family. Will her bond with Sabelo survive the rift? Will her family's trust be restored? Or will the weight of her dreams be too much to bear? Don't miss the next episode as secrets unravel and hearts are tested like never before. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay on this emotional roller coaster, because the hardest decisions are yet to come.